France's government did not collapse quietly. It collapsed in panic. In the late 1780s, French officials were running through palace corridors carrying financial reports that all said the same thing. The state had no money left. It's not enough to fund the army, not enough to buy grain, not enough to pay interest on its loans. Creditors were refusing to lend. Merchants were demanding cash the crown no longer had. France, the richest kingdom in Europe, was bankrupt. This was not a sudden disaster. It was the final result of a long pattern. For more than a century, France had poured its wealth into one overriding goal: defeating Britain. War after war, France spent enormous sums trying to break British power. And each time, the financial damage compounded. To understand how France reached this point, the story must start much earlier, when bankruptcy still seemed impossible. At the beginning of the 18th century, France was the dominant power in Europe. It had the largest population, one of the strongest armies, and vast agricultural wealth. French culture shaped European elites. French kings dictated diplomacy. The monarchy assumed that France's position was permanent. Britain, by contrast, looked weaker. It was smaller, politically unstable, and internally divided. From the French perspective, Britain was a rival, but not an equal. That assumption would prove costly. The rivalry between France and Britain was not just about territory. It was about status, trade, and control of global power. As both countries expanded overseas, their interests collided across Europe. North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and India. Every conflict in one region spilled into another. But beneath the military competition was a deeper difference that mattered far more: how each country paid for war. Britain had transformed its financial system after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Parliament controlled taxation. The government established long-term public debt. The Bank of England allowed the state to borrow reliably and at relatively low interest. British creditors trusted that Parliament would honor debts even after defeat. France never made a similar transformation. French monarchy relied on an outdated tax system riddled with exemptions. Nobles and clergy paid little or nothing. Tax collection was inefficient, corrupt, and inconsistent. Much of the population was already overburdened. When wars came, France relied heavily on short-term loans with high interest, emergency taxes, and financial improvisation. This difference mattered immediately once wars began. The War of the Spanish Succession at the start of the 1700s was the first major warning sign. France fought to prevent its enemies from surrounding it politically. The war lasted more than a decade and drained the treasury. France survived, but the cost was enormous. Debt soared. Tax pressure increased. Financial strain became normal. Instead of reforming the system afterward, the monarchy returned to business as usual. When the 7 Years' War broke out in the mid-1700s, the pattern repeated on a larger scale. This war was global, spanning Europe, North America, the Caribbean, and India. France and Britain clashed across continents. France lost badly. British naval power proved decisive. France lost Canada, key Caribbean positions, and influence in India. Militarily, it was a disaster. Financially, it was worse. France emerged from the war deeply in debt, with reduced trade revenues and damaged prestige. British officials, meanwhile, accepted the cost of the war as manageable. Britain raised taxes, serviced its debt, and continued trading. At this point, French ministers understood the problem clearly. They knew France could not compete with Britain under the existing system. They proposed reforms. They argued for taxing the nobility. They argued for centralized tax collection. They argued for long-term public credit. Each proposal was blocked. The French political system made reform nearly impossible. Nobles defended their exemptions. Regional courts rejected royal edicts. Every attempt to change taxation triggered resistance. The monarchy feared provoking unrest among elites more than it feared financial collapse. So the state chose war again and again, hoping victory would solve the problem. This brings the story to its critical turning point: the American Revolutionary War. When Britain's American colonies rebelled in the 1770s, French leaders saw an opportunity. Britain was vulnerable. Supporting the rebels would weaken Britain's global position and avenge past defeats. From a strategic perspective, the decision made sense. From a financial perspective, it was catastrophic. France poured money into the American war effort. It supplied weapons, troops, naval support, and massive loans. The cost was staggering. Unlike Britain, which taxed its population heavily to fund the war, France financed it almost entirely through borrowing. The war succeeded. Britain lost the American colonies, but France gained almost nothing economically in return. When the war ended, France was celebrated as a victor. In reality, the state was on the edge of insolvency. Debt had exploded. Interest payments consumed a huge portion of government revenue. The treasury was empty. French officials now faced an impossible situation. They could not borrow further without reforms, could not reform without political confrontation. They could not raise taxes without risking unrest. By the late 1780s, the system began to collapse. Grain shortages drove bread prices up. Urban workers spent most of their income just to eat. Tax collection faltered. Confidence in the monarchy declined rapidly. Creditors demanded repayment or refused new loans. This is where the financial crisis became a political crisis. Desperate, the king called the Estates General, an assembly that had not met in over a century. The intention was to solve the financial emergency. Instead, it exposed the depth of public anger. Representatives of the common people demanded political change alongside financial reform. The government hesitated. Authority weakened. Events spiraled beyond control. The French Revolution did not begin because people suddenly embraced radical ideas. It began because the state could no longer function financially. And that failure was rooted in decades of war spending driven by rivalry with Britain. Britain's experience highlights the contrast. Britain lost the American colonies, but it did not collapse. Its financial system absorbed the shock. Its economy continued to grow. Its credit remained intact. France won the war against Britain but lost the ability to govern itself. That is the central irony of this story. France did not fall because it was weak. It fell because it fought like a great power without building the systems required to sustain great power competition. If you're finding this breakdown useful so far, this is a good moment to like the video. It helps push serious history content to more people who actually want it. By 1789, events moved quickly. Financial paralysis led to political paralysis. Political paralysis led to revolution. The monarchy collapsed. The old order disappeared. When historians debate the causes of the French Revolution, they often focus on ideas, personalities, or class conflict. Those mattered. But beneath all of it was a simple financial reality. The French state ran out of money. And it ran out of money because, for over a century, it had chosen rivalry over reform, war over restructuring, and prestige over sustainability. Britain did not defeat France on the battlefield alone. It outlasted France financially. That is the lesson of this story. If you want more clear, engaging history explained without confusion or exaggeration, subscribe to the channel. And let me know in the comments what surprised you most about how France collapsed.